Our course program is 6 sessions. Today's input. Today I will tell you in general about online training in the company, and then with the students of the course we will go through in more detail on choosing an online learning platform, on creating an online course, running a course, how to work with participants, and how to evaluate participants, how to realize that everything went well. This is what the course syllabus will be like. We're talking to you today about the following. What are the differences between online and regular courses? Learning theory and how adults learn, and key principles of effective online learning. That's the plan with you today. So let's go. Just recently did a couple webinars. I think we can skip this slide already. We're probably already familiar with all of them. So I'll move on to what practices I use this slide in my work. I think a lot of people have memorized that as well, so I won't stop here either. And I'll move on to the introduction slide. Those who are online now, those who we may not yet know ourselves, please post in chat, city, position, and company. We're going to have such a virtual introduction to you. You can also introduce yourself to the other participants in today's class, so they can learn about you too, about your company and who you are. Well, while you write, I'll gradually move forward. When there are some answers, I'll read out. So what is online learning? When I hear the phrase online learning, I realize that different people are talking about different things. Alexandra. Kaliningrad is one of Bitrix, head of partner department. Thank you, Alexandra. When I worked at Alpha Bank in 2006, online learning was the name of such a portal where there were PowerPoint presentations, actually a PowerPoint presentation online, and you had to read them and then take the test. It was such an online text with pictures and tests. It was once called online learning. Then online courses began to appear in recordings with tests. So we shot some blocks of video. Sometimes it was a classroom performance by a trainer. Then there was editing, cutting, slicing, putting it online. Then online course notes with tests and homework checks began to appear. Platforms started to evolve. It started to become possible to send homework, check, and give feedback. Then came online courses in webinar format when the internet allowed for online classes. It's about 2010. The platform is like that. I've been working recently. Then platforms like ClickRally started to develop. And now the Zoom platform has emerged as the most stable platform in terms of connection quality. Accordingly, it gave people the opportunity to socialize live. Someone leads a webinar, the lecturer and students correspond. So of course, tests and homework checks are here to stay. And the new format that we're going for now is online webinars. Additional materials are provided. They can be in any format: tests, socializing, chatting. Right now, in terms of a communication tool, is very popular on Telegram. That is, people are more willing to communicate on Telegram than on an online platform somewhere. Okay, we got a new station, Nikki Kiev, recruiting manager. Kaliningrad manages the documentation department. Kiev, Alexei Kaliningrad, head of customer support department. And by the way, I saw Alexander, head of the partner department. In the second session, there will be a case study of a company that develops an online learning system, exactly a platform, which is perfect for partner training. They even have many cases where their customers use the system to train their partners to use the products. For example, an AIX company, chances are you may not have heard of. Yes, I'll talk about this platform in a week and show you what it looks like. All right, good. Well, that's basically the evolution of online learning. And in this course, we'll be referring to online learning in its most modern format. This includes webinars, possibly some recorded content, audio files, texts, tests, different formats depending on the goal. What does online learning consist of? What does a company need to launch online training? There are several components. The first component is the platform. That is, you need somewhere to store your courses, run tests, check homework, and so on. The second session will be dedicated to platforms. There are different ones with varying functionality and features. I will show you the most popular platforms worldwide, domestically produced platforms with Russian language and support, as well as foreign platforms. Then we need faculties. I called them faculties. They are like the different tracks of our online learning. There is going to be a slide now. I will show you what people teach online in companies. Then we need content. We will have a session on how to develop a course and how they are developed. I have developed and launched 5 courses in the last year, so I have a lot to share. We need lecturers and mentors. We will talk a lot about this too. So someone needs to teach these courses. Why the slash? Because there are 2 terms. Some people know them as lecturers, others as mentors. It is the same person. Next, we need someone who is responsible for working with the platform and with the instructors. I called this role a manager or producer, but it could be an online school administrator, online school director. It can be called different things. In short, the person responsible for making sure everything works. And of course, the connection to the company's business needs is important. because the purpose of online learning is to solve some business challenges. These are the main components of online learning: what employee training consists of in any company, what is taught online. It is believed that the most popular use case is onboarding new employees. There is also the term onboarding, which is used for customers, as training for customers or partners on how to use the product. I've listed them here as current partners, but we could add customers here too. And here I'm specifically referring to employee onboarding, because nowadays, any company an employee joins has a large number of processes, procedures, and software that they need to learn to work with. And every new employee needs to be trained on how to work with these in this company. For example, Bitrix, which is used in the sales department or for broader functionality. Next is culture. A company that wants to manage its culture needs to teach people about its culture. Next are professional hard skills training programs. This includes accounting, finance, sales, marketing, and so on. So companies create content to train employees, and this content can come from different sources. Next are soft skills. These include teamwork, time management, negotiation, influence, skills that aren't tied to a specific profession. For training in specific programs like Excel, SQL, Power BI, Bitrix, CRM systems, any other programs that need to be used in the company, people need to be trained on them somehow. Next, executive training is also done online, combining a large amount of different content. Companies often solve joint tasks with external partners, training both internal and external customers. By the way, in today's class materials, course students will have several case studies specifically about online learning in different companies. Some companies use it for training students. Those companies that massively recruit student interns for some very basic positions and then develop them. And for this, online learning simplifies and of course reduces the cost of students' entry point into the company. Companies also use it for knowledge testing to assess how well people possess certain knowledge that is important for the company, which could be knowledge of the company's products or services, and it can be used as a knowledge base. This includes both product information and training. For example, if I went out to work for a pharmaceutical company as a representative, I would need to study hundreds of different medical products, and then I need to have access to this information. Therefore, a company can have an internal knowledge base organized not in the classic text format of a training course, where there's a combination of online content, meaning video content, text content, and possibly some other types. Moreover, the advantage is that you can test, give homework assignments, grade homework, and so on. With that said, since we're in an online course, I am a big proponent of it. Specifically online learning. Now I'm going to criticize offline learning. So I hope no one here is upset, but I believe offline learning has many disadvantages. First of all, it's the inability to break offline learning into short 1 hour or hour-and-a-half blocks. In other words, it's much more difficult, it's possible, but more complicated. Second, we're in a complex modern world. In the past, companies would often hold many classes on weekends. Or the pace of life and business allowed companies to take an employee away for a full day of training during a workday. The modern world is very dynamic with a lot happening. This means many companies can't afford to send an employee somewhere for a whole day, so offline learning loses out here. Next, geographical limitations. I'm sure some of you have offices in different regions. Let's have those who have regional offices put a plus sign, please. That is, besides your main office, you have additional offices somewhere else in other countries or cities. Sometimes even for a company with 2 offices in the same city, if they're quite far apart, that's also a challenge for employees, especially if it's a very large city. I see. But judging by the names of the companies people wrote from today, like Playrix, Bitrix, there's certainly some unique structure there. It's more difficult to create a unified offline training system for all employees in different cities. Furthermore, offline is more expensive, with costs for venue, food, materials, all expenses that don't exist in online learning. Next, participants have a huge disadvantage. They can't review the materials. Since I've been teaching online a lot for about 9 years now with online courses, I know that many students review the materials after 6 months, maybe even a year. They come back when they have tasks where they need the material. They open it and look. I know this because they often write asking if they can still access the materials. Oh, where can I find my materials? It's been over a year, where do I go? Or they send homework questions after 6 months or a year, or they simply write that they were reviewing the material. It's very useful. Thank you for having such a course. Offline doesn't have this advantage. With offline learning, it's impossible to review the entire day you participated in before. In offline learning, a lot is crammed in at once, and it's hard to digest. Well, indeed, especially if the topic is complex, it's easy to overload in offline learning. Next, if there are practical exercises, in offline learning, they will mostly be detached from work. But online, you can do any exercises and weave them into your work. For example, if we're teaching about engagement, Online course participants can go and launch an engagement survey in real life after the lesson and see how it works. Next, a person is not always in a resourceful state. In offline learning, if a person comes in tired, sleep-deprived, sick, hungover, and so on, that day will be a loss for them. In online learning, it would only be one session. Furthermore, during business hours, there are many distractions in offline learning. That is, a person attending training during work hours is constantly on their phone, laptop, and is continuously being interrupted. Furthermore, the content is not preserved within the company for new employees. I probably consider this one of the biggest drawbacks of offline learning. An excellent, expensive trainer comes in, teaches some team some great skills, and leaves. A new employee joins this team tomorrow, and that's it, but they're already out of the loop. They don't have access to that information anymore. Online, it's different. A new employee joins, and they're given access to the internal course. They can view exactly the same content that other employees have seen. In other words, in an online format, the company makes a one-time investment in content, and then all employees have access to it. There's no fear that trained employees will leave. Furthermore, due to large group sizes offline, it's difficult for people to interact with the trainer, especially when someone has a question. Online, people can ask individual questions. In homework assignments, you can't even imagine how many questions people write. These are questions that aren't asked in chat or anywhere else. A person does their homework, gathers their thoughts, and submits it offline. This is difficult to do. And the last slide on the drawbacks of offline learning. If it so happens that you buy an offline training and it doesn't work out, meaning some trainer, I don't know, the employees don't like them, you'll see that most likely either they'll sit through till the end, or it will be a big problem for the trainer and the people, causing disappointment. Online, you can understand after one session whether it's suitable or not, and if it's not, you can change it. Furthermore, offline, if there is one person in the group who behaves disruptively, they hinder the learning of the entire group. Even if they just already know the material and are simply bored, or if they troll a little or show that it is uninteresting, they thereby affect the whole group. This does not happen online. That is, online, everyone is independent in a way, perceiving information on their own. Next, offline, the trainer themselves might not be in their best state. That is, they might not get enough sleep, fall ill, and so on. This will affect the entire training if it is not rescheduled, and there is still a risk of postponement. Online, if the trainer falls ill, the session can be rescheduled, or let the trainer conduct it less than perfectly, but all the other sessions will be well run. And offline, there is no opportunity to check knowledge in parts. Only at the end of the training, everything that was given is checked. Online, you can assess what a person has learned in small pieces. These are all advantages of online courses. I hope I have convinced you that online is good. However, while online courses have many advantages, they certainly have their disadvantages. That is, not every online course will be good and useful, because online, like offline, requires certain approaches. And first and foremost, it is about understanding how people learn. That is the basics of pedagogy that online course creators should master. Next, there are many drawbacks when an online course is conducted by someone who does not understand education at all, or is only in it for the money, or if the course developer created a low-quality course that is not actually educational. In general, there can be many nuances that will prevent or hinder making an online course good. Therefore, knowledge of how online learning works and some preparation here is absolutely necessary. It cannot be said that anyone can easily launch an online course. That is why preparation is required here. What is pedagogy? We probably knew and know a lot about teaching children, but few who do not deal with adult education know that adult learning happens somewhat differently. But there are specific rules and principles, and they really differ from teaching children, because the way children are taught is not very suitable for adults. So the first thing we will cover today is understanding how adults learn. There are many different theories, approaches, and principles of adult learning. For example, this phenomenon, which is one of the learning principles that works for children too, is that when a person first hears a new word they have not encountered before, their mind kind of switches off and they drop out of the learning process. This means the trainer needs to explain what any new word means. Here, for example, it was mentioned that it is not built on pedagogical foundations. Those of you who do not know what pedagogy is might have gotten bored at this point, switched off, wondered what it means, and stopped thinking about the lesson. And that is why there is an explanation here of what pedagogy is. There are several such principles, some of which we will cover today, and some in other sessions, because they need to be discussed in order for online learning to be effective. The next question is for you, and those watching on Facebook and those on Zoom. Please put a plus if you have any experience with online learning, organizing, or leading as an online trainer, or as a participant. Let us not count that here, because by attending this webinar, you have already gained that experience. Well, whoever might have already done something in this area. See, I see 3 pluses, and here is someone with only offline experience. Yes, overall, some have already encountered it, and I see a plus on Facebook too. They have the opportunity to compare and understand if everything was as described here. What is an online course? An online course is not just a set of webinars or a collection of lectures. It is a specific product that must be carefully developed and tailored to meet certain objectives. One of the main goals of an online course is to help those who have enrolled in it achieve the objectives they have set for themselves. That is why an online course promises participants a certain achievement of goals and then monitors to ensure all participants reach these goals. There are various tools for this. For instance, one of the principles of online learning, which also applies to online education in general, is that not everything should be centered solely around live interaction between the lecturer and students. It is very important for students to have the opportunity to interact with each other, and it is important for students to also have the opportunity to work with resources so they do not just listen to a webinar, leave, and forget. That means there should be notes, homework assignments, recommended reading, and case studies so that students can study additional materials. Why it is important to launch online learning now? Why is it particularly relevant right now? Why do I believe, and I am sure many will agree with me, that online learning has a great future? Because the nature of work is changing dramatically. This diagram shows 150 years where some sectors are shrinking while others are expanding. So there are constantly many changes happening in our world. Any changes require people to learn something new. The second diagram is also very interesting. It shows the growth in the number of jobs, employees, and intellectual labor. Specifically, the kind of work that isn't associated with repetitive tasks. And this also requires knowledge and competencies. Consequently, people need to acquire these skills from somewhere. Next, there's a lot of talk now about the future format of work, that companies will interact with employees somewhat differently. Why? Because there's a lot of automation, various types of robotization, artificial intelligence is starting to emerge, so simple work will be automated. For example, I was at a store over the weekend, and instead of a regular cashier, I was already paying for groceries at an automated checkout. You scan the barcode, weigh the item, and repeat until you've weighed everything, put it in a bag, pay by card, and that's it. And there's an operator who monitors 6 checkouts simultaneously. So there's an operator, she's monitoring, but it's no longer 6 cashiers sitting there doing some work. It's 1 operator and 6 checkouts. This means that such simple work as scanning products and counting money is no longer needed by this store. Now we need an operator who can, let's say, empathetically communicate with customers and solve non-standard issues. For example, let's say an item didn't scan properly. I scanned it, put it down, and now I need to call the operator, or there's some other situation. The operator needs to solve these problems. In other words, to think about how to act and what to do. That's why companies are now demanding employees who focus more on innovation rather than routine tasks, and this requires a different kind of training. Companies are transitioning from classic hierarchical structures to flexible ones, which means working in cross-functional teams. And this also requires a different kind of training. There's a lot of automation that people need to know how to work with. And this is another type of training where people need to be taught how to work with computers, machines, software, and so on, so that they can interact effectively. All of this, the future format of work, changing, let's say, the meaningful content of work. The changing industry landscape, with some industries becoming obsolete and new ones emerging, dictates the need for more extensive training. And this is where online learning comes to the aid of companies, helping them solve all these challenges. Here's another interesting statistic about the employees of the future. Well, first of all, everyone acknowledges that technology will impact work. 80% want to work with the most cutting-edge technologies. They'll also need to be trained to work with these technologies. 51% will be freelancers. That's interesting too. This means that companies will need to find ways to train freelancers who work with them on their specific requirements. And how do you train a freelancer online? Well, you can't train them exclusively online. For example, you have freelancers working for you who need to familiarize themselves with your product. How do you introduce them to it? You could, of course, send a PDF file, but you don't know if they've looked at it or if they've taken and passed the tests. An online platform allows access to training content and lets you see how much time a person has spent studying the content, how they performed on tests, and you can even assign and grade homework and so on. And the last figure is very interesting. 65% of today's school children will work in jobs that don't exist yet. This means that neither schools nor universities today will prepare them for the jobs they'll have in the future. Consequently, this puts the burden on companies and their offline and online training programs. Furthermore, regarding the skills that will be in demand in the future, they are also new to many people and are not ones that are currently well developed. These are not engineering, legal, or accounting skills, but rather cognitive abilities, emotional skills, let's say, and people will need to be trained in these as well. All of this puts pressure on the company as an organization committed to training its employees. And here, online learning is a tool that makes this task easier and helps do it more effectively. So how does an online course differ from a traditional one? The role of the lecturer shifts a bit here. While in offline learning, the lecturer is like a Toastmaster, leading and inspiring. In online learning, the lecturer is more of a mentor and coach. That is, they can't directly influence each participant. Many of you are watching this webinar not at your computer or at home, for example. Someone might be on a bus, someone in a car, someone might have gone to a meeting room, someone might be sitting in the kitchen. Consequently, the lecturer can't influence you in the same way as in person. The lecturer's task is to create a situation where students will want to learn. The role of students in online learning is also more active, as a student can turn off their phone or leave at any moment, so their responsibility is greater. Next, students are given a large number of tools and options to solve their tasks, so that they can choose the most optimal solution for themselves. Furthermore, learning often occurs asynchronously. That means we communicate asynchronously, but sometimes, for some company courses that don't require live interaction or constant information updates, it makes sense to record them once and use them for a year, 2, or 3. In online learning, continuous assessment is crucial to provide feedback to students and monitor their progress. Online learning courses also have their own specific characteristics. We will have a session where we will discuss how to prepare for online classes or how to prepare lecturers if you are responsible for ensuring that lecturers work and conduct courses, how to interact with the audience, how to engage students in learning, and what happens with students at different stages. We will cover all of this. In total, there are 4 stages of a course: the beginning of the course, early stage, late stage, and completion. And the lecturer's behavior differs at each stage. Learning is about acquiring new knowledge, skills, and abilities. It differs from various forms of development. Training and education, each having its own nuances, let's say. How do people learn? So we are talking about adult learning, that they learn a bit differently than regular children, let's say. In online and adult learning, there is a model called 70-20-10. Raise your hand if you have heard of it. 72. This model suggests that 70% of adult learning comes from experience, 20% from social learning, and 10% from formal courses. Consequently, if we want adults to learn something, we need to think about how to implement these other 2 parts in addition to courses. I see no one has raised their hand yet. Here, for example, one of the rules is that it is very difficult to teach an adult for the future in advance or without practical application. I can give a very simple example here. If anyone has learned English, you remember how difficult it is to learn the language if you don't have any opportunity to practice. It's very easy to learn English when you're in an English-speaking environment because there's a lot of practice. It's easier to learn English if you work in an international company where you can communicate with foreigners during working hours. But you can somehow learn if you correspond with foreigners, or if you read a lot in English or watch movies. And it's extremely difficult to learn English if you don't have any practice at all. That is, you just have classes, for example, and then you don't read books in English, don't watch movies, don't correspond, and generally nothing happens. This is just an example of language learning, but in adult education, this applies to absolutely all areas. Let's move on. Motivation to learn. In offline learning, this is also important. But in offline learning, if a person has already come to the training, the trainer motivates them in various ways, using different tools. It's challenging, of course, but it's possible. Online learning is more difficult. If a student doesn't attend the class, the lecturer's influence on them is minimal. The only thing they can do is expel the student if they fail certain tests or don't attend a certain number of classes. Therefore, in online learning, motivation is extremely important. There are several nuances here that affect motivation. First and foremost, it's the learner's own need to learn, and it's about how the company helps with this. For example, I was recently asked what to do about internal training that employees don't attend. What does it mean they don't attend internal training? We have English language courses that half of the people consistently don't show up for, and that's the problem. It's important to understand why they don't come, possibly because I actually believe it's due to a lack of motivation. And why is there no motivation? Most likely because people don't see any benefit for themselves. In other words, they assume that it's generally not bad, but they don't have any specific goals. Therefore, if a company wants people to attend English language courses, they need to create this motivation for them. For example, use English more in their work. For instance, specify in development plans that English is necessary, and so on. Then there will be motivation and people will attend. The same goes for goal setting. In the management system, it is called performance management in Russian. There is an element called employee development planning. If employee development is not planned in the management cycle and individual development plans are not created, then the employee's motivation is average. The motivation to learn later is much lower than if a development plan was created for them. I am speaking on average because there will always be highly motivated people who love to learn and will continue learning and so on. So here's another thing for you to think about. And if you have companies now, consider individual development plans. Let us vote now. Put a plus sign if your company has individual development plans, a minus sign if you do not. And accordingly, for those who do not have them, there is a reason to think about it right now and add these processes. Because if you want to teach people anything later, it will be much more effective if there are learning-related goals. That is, they will understand what they need to learn. I communicated the plans to the team today. Well, that is excellent. Okay, let us move on. Learning theory. There are also many things in learning that enhance the learning process. For example, reinforcement theory. But we will be analyzing LMS systems with you. I see there is a development plan. In those LMS, learning management systems, there is a feature called badges and certificates. This is one way of rewarding development. For example, in my courses, I issue diplomas to those who complete their homework. I notice that when I remind people that they need to do homework to get a diploma, they start doing their homework very actively. Next, there is cognitive learning theory, which states that learning is actually a significant load on the brain. Experiential learning theory suggests that people learn better through practice. That's why in my courses, there's always homework where people must apply their knowledge in practice. And social learning theory states that people learn better when they're with other people. What makes learning more effective? What can be applied? It's emotional engagement. There are different ways to achieve this. This exercise has fewer opportunities online. It's a stimulating environment. We'll talk about it now and time for reflection. In adult learning, there's a specific cycle called the Kolb cycle, where people learn by going through stages such as do, evaluate, learn, and apply. That's how they learn. In other words, when they've done something and gotten a result, they gained an understanding of what they didn't understand. They learned something and applied it. This works much better than if the do and evaluate stages are missing. Accordingly, knowing how the Kolb cycle works, an online course designer can properly structure them so that all of this is triggered for the learner. Therefore, when planning when people will reflect, you need to think about how to connect the content with learners' past experiences, create opportunities for social interaction, engage not only people's mental abilities, work with listeners' attention, but also activate as many of their senses as possible. There are also different learning styles in terms of how people learn. There are activists, reflectors, theorists, and pragmatists. Activists actively try everything without warnings or prejudices. Reflectors first observe new experiences from different angles, and only then come to some conclusions. Theorists, often perfectionists, adapt and apply their observations in the form of theories, and pragmatists always want to touch and try everything. You can often see this in students too, where some can't understand until they're given a lot of theory. Others, as soon as they get a tool, immediately apply it and start sharing their experience and so on. There's also a concept in learning known as the learning curve, which typically starts with slow progress in learning, then accelerates and then slows down. In other words, people learn differently at different stages of their learning process. This is also normal. 10 key principles of learning. Now we'll go through these 10 key principles and draw an analogy with online learning to understand how people learn online. The first key principle is that any course has 4 elements with the learner at the center. That is, there's the learner, and there are 4 additional elements. These are the environment, that is where they learn, the lecturer, and the knowledge. And the right combination of these 3 components allows students to learn effectively. You cannot subtract anything here. For example, you cannot say that knowledge is important, but the role of the lecturer is not. Or you cannot say that the lecturer and knowledge are the main things, and the environment does not matter. All 3 factors, as well as the learner themselves, are important for learning to take place. Next, a course is a combination of experiences, such micro-experiences that a person gets. An ideal course is a combination of 60 experiences. What is considered an experience? It is reading something. It is some post that people can make on social media or a message on Telegram. It is some notes that they make. It is analyzing a problem, participating in a discussion, reviewing materials for other students, conducting research, watching videos, and so on. These are all micro experiences, doing homework, taking tests, which allow students to learn. The lecturer element. Their task is to guide the person, that is, to be a mentor who helps them learn. The student's role is to learn actively. I will remind you that in online learning, the student's role is more active and more involved than in offline learning. That is, in offline learning, a student can be more passive. And then there is the environment, which influences how people learn. It is a webinar room, that is where people meet. Well, in this case, it is Zoom, for example. These are other participants, like a group of participants on Facebook or Telegram. It is a learning management system where they then interact with the content, and possibly, if necessary, some group calls that students make. This is all the environment that helps learning. Next, the second principle, learners bring their own knowledge, skills, behaviors, and experience to learning. That is, everyone comes with their own experience, everyone brings something of their own, and this is also normal, this is good. Consequently, the trainer has to take all of this into account. This helps the trainer integrate new knowledge with the student's existing knowledge, so it's useful to understand what students come with. Next, students can be very different, and that's true. Some may already know a lot, others may know nothing at all, others might be complete beginners. Accordingly, the lecturer works a bit differently with different students and helps each one advance a little bit. That is, it's clear that coming with different knowledge, everyone will leave with slightly different knowledge. But it's the lecturer's job to take all of this into account. How does the lecturer find out what they know? There are different ways, either testing or discussing topics or asking questions, just like I periodically ask questions. This is necessary to understand what stage you're at, what you know and what you don't know. Next, the mentor or lecturer is the director of the learning experience. So they have a very important responsibility. They're responsible not only for giving lectures, but also for overall student guidance, student support, answering students' questions, assessing learning outcomes, and so on. That is, a lecturer is not just a talking head that you listen to, turn off, and forget. Next, the fourth point is that not all students need all the course content, and not everyone needs to learn all the key concepts from the course. This is true. That is, even though the course may be quite extensive, people may come with fairly specific queries and leave with specific answers. This is normal. In other words, the lecturer doesn't need to try to cram the entire course into every student, because not every student needs all of that information right now. Moving on. Point number 5. Every learning experience includes the context in which the student is learning. In other words, it's crucial to consider the environment and conditions in which the student is learning and what system is supporting them in this process. Next, 6th point, each student has their own learning capacity. This is also true, that some people can learn more, some less, but the point is that students learn much more with a mentor or lecturer than without them. Next, in the course, people learn not just words or terms, but concepts. These are like bits of information or blocks of information, and there are certain nuances here. That is, you need to be able to draw students' attention to these blocks, allow them to study, analyze and apply them, and then continue to live and work with this knowledge. Next, different instructions are needed for different learning outcomes. Depending on the course, different approaches, nuances, homework assignments, and even lecture formats may be used. A working document for planning exercises. A good tool to use is when we outline the expected outcome for different topics or subtopics and see which exercise fits best for this expected outcome, because different exercise formats will be suited differently for different outcomes. 9th point, all other things being equal, more time allocated to tasks means more learning. Indeed, the more a person practices and the more we can encourage them to practice, the more they learn. I have students who are taking courses where homework is optional, and there are students who do all the homework assignments. So instead of choosing 1, 2, 3, or 4, they do the first, second, third, and fourth, and you can see how they progress and learn. That's why, for example, it's very useful to make homework assignments optional and offer those who wish to do them all. And 10th, also one of the last principles of online learning, we shape our tools, but our tools also shape us. That is, interaction with different tools. As developers of online learning and courses, we gain different experiences, and this affects how we teach. Consequently, the emergence of new systems also changes our approaches. This is also normal. For reflection, the task will be to recount the main aspects of this lecture. Ask yourself which of the 10 principles are most well known, what exercises you would use if you were creating a course for your students, and which of these principles are most interesting and intriguing to you. Now, I will tell you a bit about my experience in online learning, share some of my thoughts, how I came to it, and how I was transformed as well. I got my first training experience in early 2006 when I was hired by Alpha Bank as a trainer and recruiter. My task was to recruit loan specialists for Eldorado, M-Video, and other stores, and then train them. The training lasted 1 week. It was training in sales techniques, product knowledge, working with the software, and so on. And I, fresh out of university, was trained on how to do this. I was training young people. I conducted these trainings, and it was actually a heavy workload. The two of us conducted the trainings. We led 5 consecutive days of training together. It's very challenging. By the end of the training, our vocal cords were usually strained, like after a bad cold, with a scratchy throat and sore vocal cords. It was interesting. And I was introduced to online learning in 2010. I had various experiences with offline learning. I occasionally conducted various offline trainings, but I entered the online world in 2010, where I first learned as a student. I was looking for a leadership development program for myself, as I had become a manager, and I needed to find something to enhance my skills. I found a coaching course, and it was in an online format. It was a novelty for me, but it was incredibly interesting. The course lasted for 100 sessions once a week, if I'm not mistaken, and it went on for 10 months. That was the duration of the course. I completed it. I really liked the format. I liked that, first of all, I could watch the recordings if I missed a session. Secondly, it wasn't overwhelming. I could watch it once a week in the evenings. It was very manageable. Thirdly, there was a huge amount of homework, which I did, applied in practice, and saw the results. And after completing this course, I suggested to the instructor that we create our own local course, and we launched a career coaching course. I'm sure there are students somewhere on Facebook or elsewhere who have taken this course. We trained about 5 groups with 10 to 15 students in each group in 2011, 2012, 2013, and I think it continued even after that. I taught them. It was my first experience, my first time creating a program, my first time creating presentations, homework assignments, and grading homework. I remember that preparing the first presentations and the first lesson was very challenging for me. For 2 weeks, I was developing the idea of what would be in the presentation, consulting with my partner with whom we were jointly launching this. We discussed a lot. I was writing things down, researching, and so on. So it was really challenging. We conducted several free classes. They're still available on YouTube, my online lessons. This was in 2011, and I saw how it worked. At first, going live was extremely difficult. I was really nervous. It's probably like speaking in front of a camera. But then, over time and with experience, it got easier and easier. It was very interesting to see what kind of people came to learn and how they learned. It was completely different from offline learning, and there were many small mistakes that occurred, missing something here and there, slightly delaying the start of a broadcast for some reason, losing connection somewhere, or something else happening. But after almost 10 years now, the experience is much greater. More knowledge and even more courses launched. So today it's become a very beloved activity for me. I see great benefit in it for the participants. That's why I strongly believe in online education. Homework for those already in the course. Write a list of departments for your company. As a reminder, by departments, I mean the areas in which you'd like to train people online. If it's for partners, then for partners. If it's for clients, then for clients. In other words, outline what should be in your online school internally for the company. Now, how to launch such a small online edition and how to launch online training in a company. If, for example, you're watching a webinar and you're not ready for a serious full-scale launch yet, here's what you can do as your first steps, your first attempts to test what online learning is, what kind of beast it is. I recommend making the first experience very simple. You won't need anything complicated. There's a platform called Workplace. It's a corporate social network from Facebook. It has a free version. In this free version, you can conduct live broadcasts and upload videos. What needs to be done? You need to register your company on this platform. Again, it's free. Then ask 5 to 10 managers to determine which course will help the company achieve its main goal. That is, find someone to talk about our product, someone to talk about our culture, someone for newcomers. Let's make a course. Then write a curriculum for this course, that is what lessons it consists of. Choose a platform for online learning. You can use anti-trainings as one of the most accessible options, or simply record videos, make presentations, and upload them in Workplace. See which employees are willing to conduct this training within the company. Conduct your first online course. You can do it in Zoom and then upload it to Workplace or anti-training. Don't forget to record the course, upload everything to the platform later, develop tests and homework, and see how it all works. This is the kind of first experience you can get. This concludes today's session. This was primarily an introduction to online learning in the company. In the next session, I will talk about the platforms available for creating courses, their features, how you interact with them, and what to expect from them. Then in the third session, we will discuss how to create an online course, both in your role as a course instructor and in the role of course creator, and find an expert for this course. Once you find an expert, they will come up with the content themselves. My experience shows that very few people are capable of creating a course on their own. In other words, they all need help, and quite substantial help at that. In the fourth session, we will talk about how to conduct these courses, again, either as a trainer or you as an organizer, in which case you ensure that the instructor follows certain rules and principles. In the fifth session, we will discuss how to attract participants, how to ensure that students complete the course. This is also a challenging task, but there are tools that can help. And in the sixth session, we will talk about how to evaluate course participants and online education. That is, we will discuss how to summarize results, evaluate outcomes, tests, homework assignments, badges, certificates, and other various things in the sixth session. Books on the topic of general development, help them grow or watch them leave, about employee development and the art of teaching employee development. This concludes today's session. I'll ask you to write in the chat what you found most interesting, most valuable, what you're taking away from today. Write in the chat what you gained from today's session. The next session is exactly 1 week from now at the same time. That is January 30th. Just like today, you have time to think carefully about what will be in your internal online school, within the corporate structure, what departments. Even if you're not completely ready for everything yet, write down what you envision for yourself. Wow, that's quite a summary. Development plans are needed in the company for employees, examples of platforms, structured delivery. The principles and the learning process itself are well described to the unicorn. Okay, all right, who else will write something? Please take notes. By the way, while you're finishing up, I can say that I'm confident. I think it won't even take 5 years before creating internal online training for employees becomes the responsibility of every HR department in a company. Because online training is really cool, especially for new employees. There may not be complex professional courses. They'll likely be purchased externally, because it's very important to maintain the novelty of the material. There are many nuances, but those very basic courses that should be in every company, they'll be online 100%. A step-by-step breakdown of all the components of an online course. Thank you, Anna. All right then. A big thank you to everyone who was online today. It was nice to see you all. So I got information that this can actually be done and it's not scary. That's true. That is, if you follow all the recommendations over the 6 sessions, you'll end up with a pretty good first course. And from there, it's a matter of experience, and experience comes with practice. The main thing for you next, like in English, the main thing is to overcome the barrier. It's the same here. The main thing is to create the first course, then it gets easier. I confirmed the importance of socialization for students. Yes, good. Thank you all once again for being online today. See you in exactly 1 week. Bye-bye. Let's stay in touch in the chats and everywhere else.